Okay, second years, sorry. This is your first lecture for history. This semester we're going to look at churches and castles, and then next semester we'll be looking at mosques and temples. So a lot of religious architecture, but also some fun stuff like castles. I've recorded some of the lectures last year, when COVID kicked in, but the first ones I didn't do. So yeah, there's a lot of material, so let's kick right in. Okay, so church architecture is quite long. Obviously, it's been around 2,000 years. The first thing you need to know is that the Roman Empire was obviously anti-Christian initially, and then the entire Roman Empire converted to Christianity around 250 AD, somewhere there. And then the Roman Empire split. We had the Roman Empire in the west, head up by Rome, and the Byzantine Empire in the east, the capital of which was Constantinople. And the two, they had different. The religions changed because the Christianity in the west was Catholic essentially, and the Christianity in the east was Orthodox. Today we have the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox churches, which kind of stem from that, and the Catholic Church became the Catholic and Protestant churches today. Quite interestingly enough, so this shows you a time period. Your Byzantine churches were very similar, and they kicked off around 350 AD, and then kind of petered out 1300 thereabouts. Here we have a Romanesque architecture, kind of going into Gothic, and then Renaissance, then Reformation, Baroque and Rococo coming later. And you can tell from the windows of churches how old they are. Early stuff looked like that. The Romanesque is round. And then we start to get the lancet, what's called a lancet window, a pointed window, which is essentially a Gothic window. But this is kind of pre-Gothic, the early stuff. And then we're going into proper Gothic. And then it really widens it out in the later stuff. Okay, so let's head on to Lawrence's lecture. I'm going to try and go through it quite quickly. I'm using his lecture because I don't see any need to reinvent the wheel. Christianity had its birth in Judea. I don't want to go into it too much. The apostles Peter and Paul carried Christianity around the world. Well, what happened was the Jews who became Christians were persecuted, and so they ran away. And by running all over the world, they essentially spread the faith around the place. Early Christian architecture refers to architecture of the earlier Christian churches of the Roman era. Okay, we're talking about the Roman era. During the period of the 1st century to the 3rd century after the death of Jesus, Christianity was a secret society. It was considered dangerous and subversive by the government, so Christians mainly met in tombs, private houses. Gradually, however, it spread and was finally accepted by the Roman government and basically became the state religion. Not that that was particularly a good thing. Okay, the following is a time period of early Christian events. 286 AD, Emperor Diocletian reorganized the Roman Empire, splitting it into two, the eastern and western parts. So you can see the split in the Roman Empire happened quite early on. Emperor Constantine, 313 AD, recognized the Christian religion and adopted it as a state religion. Emperor Constantine reunites the Roman Empire with a new capital. I think that's Constantinople, which is Constantinople which is Istanbul today. Right. You're not going to see these. This is Diocletian, and this is Emperor Constantine. They're funny looking fellows. Okay, so we can see the spread of Christianity. Around 325 AD, it was still in pockets all over the place. And then by 600 AD, it had spread basically throughout the civilized world, or what was called the civilized world in those days. With Christianity widely accepted as a straight religion in Rome, it became necessary for architecture to respond. I'm going to go through this quite quickly. There was a processional entry and exit of the clergy, an altar area at the top where they celebrate Mass. The altar, you must understand that Christianity comes from Judaism. In Judaism, there is a sacrifice for the sins of the people, and the sacrifice happened on an altar. The Christians believe that Jesus was the sacrifice, but they celebrate what's called Mass, or communion, which is the breaking of bread and drinking of wine, which is symbolic of the body and blood of Jesus. Like a lamb or a goat was sacrificed, so the Christians believe the body of Jesus was sacrificed, and it was sacrificed on an altar like the lambs were in Judaism, and that's why there is an altar in a Christian church. There was a segregation of clergy from laity, or people, normal people, which we'll discuss later. Early Christian meetings were in churches, house churches, and let's look at some of the early house churches. First, churches met in upper rooms. Often Jewish houses had a large upper room upstairs, which was like the biggest room in the house, so people met there. So the first couple of 100 years, we've got house churches. Here's an example of a house church. It's really just an example of a Roman house. Quite often, I don't know if you guys did it last year, you're going to do it this year. House Pansa in Pompeii is a very good example. Often the Roman houses were built around a courtyard, because you've got the dangerous outside, and so you've got these walls, and the inside is protected, and it's a courtyard where you get light, and often there's a fountain and water. So you've got these thick outside walls where you have people coming into a place, and then all the windows obviously focus into the courtyard, which is a safer environment. There's an assembly area. They've turned this sort of large area into the assembly area. Often there was a place for washing, and baptism is part of the Christian faith, where people go into water and get covered in water and immersed in water. And so often in the house they turned a place into a baptistry, what's called a baptistry. Right, now the first proper churches were essentially basilicas. What a basilica is a government hall. So the Romans built these halls for public assembly in their cities. They built cities, and the basilica was used for law courts. That might have been used for formal functions, for the weddings of large dignitaries. And so when Christianity became the state religion, obviously the state owned the basilicas, and so the basilicas became the early churches. So a rectangular hall was really all that a basilica is. Let's have a look further. Here we can see this is quite a big and complex one. They're often much simpler than this. So you've got this basilica here. This particular one has got this entrance area around a courtyard, and there's all sorts of words. So that's your atrium, that's that area there. An ambulatory, where you amble around the side. This was quite common in later Christian architecture for monks and their convents and places like that. Because the spanning capacity was limited in those days, they would then have columns to hold up the building halfway along, and that often they popped up. You see that kink there, and they would have clerestory windows. So they would have windows along there which let light in. And then the apse was at the front where your altar was. Your nave is where everybody sits, and so these are the general public, and a lot of them couldn't read. And then obviously aisles down the side. Here's another example of a basilica church. They were often east-west, when they were built for Christian use, because I did my thesis on church architecture, but the churches were often faced east, and then you walked in towards the west, almost the same way that the sun goes. This is just a nice picture of one. Now, so here's another example of a basilica. They were all different shapes and sizes. Obviously, because the cross is the symbol of Christianity, the guys liked to have a cross-shaped plan. So your early basilica was basically just that. That's a good example of a very simple building. And then very soon the guys wanted, well, let's have something extra here, so that the choir or whatever else could happen there. And this because the basilicas were Roman, they were happening on the Roman side. On the east side, the Byzantium side, churches developed, instead of being long and having a procession, they were more circular. That they weren't long, they were more like this one here. This is a cruciform one. This one does have one longer side, but you will see very soon they became symmetrical all the way around. Okay, here's another basilica. Okay, here's a good example of the clerestory windows. That's a clerestory windows, if you don't know what the word clerestory means. Narthex, atrium, there's a fountain, often a fountain is in the middle, gatehouse. So this is quite a big building again. Here's a section through one, St. Peter's, Rome, AD 333. So this is quite early. You can see the Romans have got their timber roofs, which they will have designed. Then you get these quite high walls inside. They're obviously supported by the external walls there. And you've got light coming through the clerestory windows. Right, here's some interesting words. Populaeum. I don't even know what that is. What's a populaeum? The entrance building of a sacred precinct with a church or imperial palace. So there would be somewhere down here. Atrium, here's your atrium. Your narthex is the area there from, well, basically the entrance, the foyer of the church. The nave, as we know, is in the middle, aisles down the side. Crossing across there, apse at the back. And then we talked about the clerestory windows. Okay, so, Basilica Church, St. Peter's in Rome. Okay, the St. Peter's in Rome did not look like that in AD 333, but it developed, and it was the same site. And so this is St. Peter's in Rome, much later. We will look at more in detail the churches later in the year. Basilica di San Giovanni. You can see it's Italian. Remember, the guys are Latin Italian. They have an Italian sound. Okay, we're running out of time, guys. Churches developed quite elaborate fronts and then quite elaborate interiors. And as I said, they were processional, and they were usually columns. They were all quite similar in design. And they got, later on during like the Baroque era, they got quite elaborate inside, and we will discuss that later. Okay, I want to stop this now and start second lecture shortly.